Bertrand Russell once said, "The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, while the wise are so full of doubt." And I see this all too often in our society. I see so many people who blindly believe all kinds of things which they never bother to verify. They just accept without question all kinds of false information, and then they look down on others with condescension. They have so much arrogance, and yet they are so incredibly ignorant. And to be clear, it's not the ignorance that bothers me, because everyone is ignorant in some regard. I'm ignorant in regard to many things. There's many things that I don't know. The problem is there are people who think they know everything. The problem is there are people who are ignorant of their own ignorance. The problem is that there are people who are so arrogant as to believe that they can never be wrong. These are the kind of people that even when you show them facts and evidence, they disregard it because they don't really care about truth. They only care about being right, or rather, being perceived as being right. They only care about feeling superior to others. And nothing feels more superior than the belief that you are never wrong. You see, a wise person is someone who is aware of their own ignorance. A wise person is aware of their uncertainty. And it's this awareness that allows room for learning. If you think you already know everything, you won't be open to new information, especially information that might conflict with your current beliefs. If you want to be wise, you have to hold truth in the highest regard. This means that truth has to be more important than having other people's approval or admiration, because sometimes the truth is unpopular. Sometimes the truth is not what other people want to hear. And it means being willing to change your mind. It means not holding on rigidly to any belief or viewpoint, but having the willingness to change your mind in light of new information. Most of us don't like to acknowledge when we're wrong. It doesn't feel good to be wrong. In fact, it feels quite uncomfortable. And sometimes people will cling to the most absurd ideas just to avoid admitting that they're wrong. They'll reject facts and evidence just to protect their ego, to protect their image, to avoid the discomfort of admitting that they're wrong. What I've noticed is that the sort of person who is unwilling to admit when they're wrong is the same sort of person who has this false sense of certainty regarding things which they are not actually certain about. So many people blindly accept things without evidence and then hold those beliefs with such conviction that they're unwilling to consider that they could be wrong. But what makes it easy to admit when you're wrong is not to have that false sense of certainty in the first place, but instead to acknowledge your uncertainty. When I'm presented with any sort of information, I often notice that the information is very limited. In other words, I might not have all the information. I might not have all the facts. I might not know the whole story. And so even when the information seems to point to a certain conclusion, it's not really conclusive because I don't have all the information. So there's always this sense of uncertainty. There's this recognition that until I have all the facts, I can't say with any certainty what the truth of the situation actually is. And so long as I have this uncertainty, I also have the willingness to change my mind. If I'm presented with new information that refutes what I currently believe, I can more easily accept it. So if I start out with the recognition from the beginning that I'm not certain or that I could be wrong, then it's a lot easier to admit to being wrong if that turns out to be the case. So you have to have a certain humility, which simply means to be able to be okay with not knowing everything. to be okay with not being certain about everything. It simply means that you're willing to acknowledge your own ignorance. And secondly, you have to hold truth in the highest regard. You have to consider truth to be more important than appearing to be right or having the approval of your peers. And that takes a certain kind of integrity. It may even take a bit of courage because you might find yourself surrounded by people who believe something that is false. And if you confront them with the truth, or if you simply disagree, they might reject you. And so you have to have the willingness to be rejected. You have to hold truth to such a high regard that you're willing to be rejected. So you see, it's not just that fools tend to have a false sense of certainty. It's actually that false sense of certainty that makes them foolish in the first place. And it isn't that wise people tend to have a lot of doubts, but rather it is their willingness to doubt which makes them wise.
If you find value in this content, be sure to like, share, and subscribe.